Welcome everybody to our third edition of Shift in Thinking. It's the third edition. We have been really excited to have that third edition because we think it's a special edition. It's not only that we have a guest actually from Australia, so this is what COVID brings along. Now we're able to host events with famous participants from across the globe, which is really great. So welcome Jemma Green, but not only that, we're talking about a really pressing topic, which is actually climate change. And you may know that there have been a lot of discussions prior to Corona, but also right now. And this is a huge topic to discuss, and we're really eager to fit it into the next 40 minutes. Not sure if that will work. As you know how the format goes, next to me is Sebastian, co-host of the session.
Welcome from my side.
What we will actually do is we will give you again a little intro, a bit of a theoretical intro into the topic, but not just that. You can, if you want, of course, post questions in the chat room. So there's again a chat room, and that will be moderated by Alice. So I heard there's already some discussions going on, which is great. And then the second thing, the session will also be recorded, as it is 3 o'clock in the afternoon in Perth, Australia. And 9 o'clock this morning, we will also stream and show that Shift in Thinking event in the afternoon. But without further ado, let us get going. And I would like to give you a little bit of an intro on the background, what we actually mean by talking about climate change right now. We have had all of this activity prior to the crisis, but if you think of it right now, there is a huge impact currently, and just one little thing to show is if you see it, you know it all. Borders have closed, the travel has actually decreased, and this is just a picture of China, who's a little further down the road with regards to the crisis, where you actually see the activity of flights and travel. And as you know, this is one huge contributor to our carbon footprint, or actually the not so good ecological footprint. And it's 12,000 flights per day that actually have gone missing. So I think currently it's only 1,000 to 2,000 flights per day that you can actually see in China. And prior to that, it was 13,000. And not just that, overall, globally, it's been 200,000 flights that you actually see. And you just can get a little grasp of what that means for the climate. I mean, the less planes fly, and it's not just that, it's we travel less, we stay at home, which is, of course, primary reason for health reasons. However, it obviously has an impact, and there are first studies. I just recently saw that picture. There are actually fish wandering around in Venice again because it's clean water. So obviously there is something happening, but this is really short term, right? So same thing, if you look at coal consumption, for example, in China, it has dropped, has an impact. But the question really is, why is it that the people are acting now? So collectively, because the pressure is obviously on them and the threat is obviously on them, but why haven't we been able to act before? There is obviously an impact, which is great, and we see a reduction in the CO2 emissions, which is good for our environment, but shouldn't we have done that before, and why haven't we done that? And it's not that climate change, and this is what we heard at least very often, that climate change wasn't visible before. If you ask a lot of scientists, it may even be a way bigger threat that humanity as a whole is facing compared to the COVID crisis. And these are just some pictures that may speak their own language. But if you see it, it has been there before. If you only take Germany, for example, we had really, really dry summers, hot summers. The environment is changing already. If you talk about the plastic waste and so on and so forth. Gemma, perhaps you will talk about it. If you look at the bushfires we had actually in Australia, so the impact was there already. It was visible, and it's not that we could say, well, it's happening sometime in 10 years and only then it's visible. No, global warming is there. We see a change, and it has an impact on biodiversity and so on and so forth. So why is it that we don't see the effect or don't act on the effect so strongly as we do it now? Right? I'm not saying, and this is it shouldn't be interpreted wrongly, I'm not saying that we should not have acted right now. Yes, it's important that every life is saved possible, but we want to discuss actually why are we acting so collectively, or perhaps not collectively. That's exactly the discussion that we want to have, and why don't we when it comes to climate change. And this is just one funny image. If you look at it, yes, it is about flattening the curve. And in most of the countries, we have managed to flatten the curve. So there's not that many people in the hospitals anymore. and so on and so forth. So it somehow works what we're doing. So our collective behavior seems to have an effect. But if you look at climate change, that may, as I said, even be the bigger threat. It's coming perhaps a little slower and it's not that visible, so people are not dying immediately and so on and so forth, but we're seeing the impact. And one of the explanations may come from a theory, which some of you may know, which is actually a game theoretic approach. And we actually wondered and we discussed, why is it that we as group or as humanity as a whole are acting so strongly right now? We're all staying at home. We're putting so many things at stake. Perhaps Sebastian, you let us know your thoughts on that game theoretic approach, and yeah, what your conclusions are with regards to collaborating collectively.
Thanks, Thomas. I mean, game theory is a nice way to abstract from reality and create a model where you can show like the basic strategic interactions between different actors and players, and of course, and that is clear immediately, the COVID impact is something that we already can observe. We experience it, we hear about it, we see that people are sick. When it comes to climate change and the impact of climate change, it's not so obvious, at least not for everybody. Yeah? And so there's a big difference between both. But I think from game theory we can look a little into the climate change topic and also the dilemma. And let's have a look at this little payoff matrix. So the assumption is here very simplified, of course. We assume like two parties, two countries, two actors, let's say, X and Y, and they have two strategies. Yeah, they can take two actions. They can either cooperate, that is, comply, let's say, with some climate policy agreements, or they can defect or exploit the environment. And as you can see, like in the matrix, you see some numbers, some figures. These are payoffs, right? It's just to make things very simple. Yeah? If both cooperate, like there's a payoff 1 for both actors. If all actors exploit, it's 3. So you can see it's beneficial for the different actors to exploit because, and that's now the important assumption, because maybe the short-term assessment of the climate policy is not really a real threat to the environment. So whatever a country does, for example, in boosting productivity, boosting jobs, is like more beneficial to a country's economic success than protecting the climate. That's a very short-term assessment and something I think we see here and there. So when everybody acts like that, we are in a state of the world where everybody is exploiting the environment, which is also sometimes labeled as the tragedy of the commons. Now, this is maybe not the most realistic and most representative picture of today's climate discussion and policy world. I think now the scientific community has shown a lot of evidence that climate change is happening and that it's actually becoming more and more costly, right? So now let's assume that there's a cost to climate change, and we'll give it an arbitrary number of, let's say, -10. It's really a disutility, it's a cost. Now you can clearly see that if both parties, if both countries, cooperate on certain policy measures, they will be better off. So the costs will decrease because the measures are effective. But, and that's now the tricky part, if one party complies with the protective measurements and complies with the policy agreements, this might have a positive effect for the environment, but if the other party doesn't, they might be even more it might be even more beneficial because they on the one hand, benefit from the actions of the others, but they still can continue exploiting the environment, and by even, like, for example, boosting their own productivity, consumption, etc. So, which leads us to the so-called and famous prisoner's dilemma. There's a dominant strategy for each party, for X and Y, to defect from the cooperative equilibrium. So, and that is, I guess, a quite good description of what we are seeing. It's very simplified. And now the big question is, how can we transform a prisoner's dilemma into a state of the world where collaboration becomes a dominant strategy over defection or exploiting the environment? And I think here it's very important to really consider again what kind of measures we can take, and obviously, I mean, the whole climate education, green technologies, the way how we think about agreement negotiations. This all pays into the overall goal to make collaboration more affordable, less costly, so that the dominant strategy is collaboration. Something you call in game theory the stack hunt. State of the world, and that is also something where I now want to lead over to Jemma. We heard that green technologies, innovation in green tech can add to such a transformation, and I think we have an absolute expert now with us. Hi from Frankfurt to Perth, Australia. It's wonderful to have you. You have a background in finance. You've been working for JP Morgan, but now you're founder of a very interesting and exciting project and company that is a blockchain-powered peer-to-peer energy and carbon credit trading platform. Jemma, it's good to have you. Maybe you tell us what Power Ledger is all about.
Certainly, thanks for having me. We're a technology company and we use the blockchain to facilitate efficient trading of electricity peer-to-peer and also the trading of environmental certificates, so credits, renewable energy certificates. And we've been operating for 4 years and we have projects, I think, in 9 countries around the world, including France, Austria, the US, India, Australia, Japan, Malaysia, and Thailand.
That is really impressive. What do you think? What can the green tech innovation contribute to transforming the dilemma we are in, and incentivize people, countries, global institutions to collaborate?
It's a great question. I think that the word incentivize is a great term because our platform is really about putting a market mechanism in place to incentivize the right kind of actions and behaviours. And by that I mean our virtual power plant product provides an economic incentive for households that have invested in a battery to pay back their battery faster by trading electricity into the market and providing stabilisation services. And so it used to be that the electricity market was built however it was built and the market sat on top of it. But using platforms like Power Ledger, it can create the market mechanism and the incentives to actually deliver the physical outcomes that we want. So in the case of energy, because of too much solar, the system's becoming destabilised. But using a market mechanism facilitated by our virtual power plant, you can encourage more batteries to come online, suck up that solar, and then also dispatch it when the market needs it. And households can, by investing in a battery, not only supply the electricity needs, but the needs of others. And in doing so, pay back their investment in a battery sooner. So, it used to be, I think, that being sustainable and making money were separate to each other. But I think that the great thing about the moment in time we're at, particularly with energy, is that they are no longer mutually exclusive. They are now intimately related.
Gemma, one question. You said the market power, or actually market mechanism, might solve that, and also one of your core promises is actually giving power to the people, right? That's kind of the logic of blockchain as well. If you think of the technology blockchain, right, the underlying thing is decentralization. That's one of the things, but also collaboration. Now, coming back to the current crisis, do you currently see an increase, for example, to that logic, or is it actually the other way around? How did you actually feel during the crisis? What was your business actually seeing? What happened for you? Did it trigger more demand? Did it trigger less demand? And so on and so forth.
Well, in Australia, since the coronavirus crisis, um, we've seen solar retailers reporting 40% jumps in solar PV sales and 400% increase in inquiries to purchase batteries. And I think that is a function of people's desire to be more self-sufficient. And energy is an area that they are able to more readily take control of in terms of self-sufficiency. And one strategy is, to size the system, solar and battery system, for self-consumption. But to the extent there is the possibility of trading at and receiving a passive income, then I think that that is also something that is of great interest to many who invest in these kinds of technologies. So I think that the coronavirus has heightened people's awareness around the extent to which they are dependent on systems and markets, and that there is a perhaps greater appetite right now to look at how do I increase my levels of self-sufficiency. And although in the first instance it had been focused on things like toilet paper, I think as people's thinking has evolved around this and the consequences, energy has become a key area of focus as well. And the dynamics around energy have shifted a lot as a result of shutdowns, lockdowns, and people working from home. So air pollution has, significantly dropped worldwide. I think in New York, the carbon monoxide levels, which is largely produced by cars, has fallen by half compared to the same time as last year. And in China, the nitrogen dioxide emissions have reduced greatly, and we've been able to see that in terms of NASA releasing images which showed the country's reduction. And I think in some ways it's curious if you look at the impacts of air quality on people's health. In China, 1 million people die every year from health issues related to poor air quality, and that is far in excess of some of the projected and actual deaths as a result of this virus, or indeed influenza.
Perhaps, that's a very interesting observation, right? When it comes to pandemics, like COVID-19, there seems to be really this sense of urgency to act and to do something, and you see how the beliefs shift also in terms of agreeing to what policymakers are actually asking their people to do, right, in terms of shutdown and other really limiting aspects. So it seems to work in a way, right? But there's so many other things. You mentioned now the air pollution thing, where many more people die every year, and there we don't really act. The same with climate issues. So for me, always the question is, can we act on the climate change before we are actually getting too close to a tipping point where we'll have irreversible consequences, right? And what can we do there? So is it now a very good moment to step back and to see, okay, if we reduce our consumption, if we reduce our normal patterns of business, we can actually have an effect pretty quickly. Is it that what we need, that we are able to also act on climate topics, or what kind of environment, what kind of situation do we need, yeah, that all these policymakers, we as citizens, yeah, also focus more on protecting the climate?
Well, I think that, you're asking a question about how do we get people to do the things that we know are good for them, and change their behaviour. And in the case of, the coronavirus, it's really fear of, dire consequences that has kind of triggered this kind of lockdown. But it's not like that would be acceptable forever. I think there will be things that will be kind of permanent consequences of this, in terms of the way we live and changes in our society. But it's not like this is a long-term response. It's a tactical response, not a strategic response to this risk. In terms of concerns around clean air, the interventions that are being planned are more strategic and long-term, but also taking longer to implement. And I think, I'm not sure doing an immediate quick changeover of everything is actually the right solution. It's not to say we shouldn't move faster, but there are consequences from, unintended and perverse consequences from taking too extreme action on things, or rapid action without really taking account of the secondary and tertiary impacts. And in the case of the actions taken to address the risks associated with COVID-19, the economic impacts of those actions are going to be far reaching and very profound. The amount of money printing that's happened is going to be debt that needs to be paid off by those countries for decades to come. Unemployment figures are going to rise significantly. In the US, before that, it was sitting at 3.5% and is looking at going to in excess of 10%. And we know that unemployment, health issues caused from unemployment result in death. And in fact, research in the US has shown that death from unemployment rates rise. 40,000 people will die on average per 1% increase in unemployment in the US. So just from the 3.5% to 10%, we're looking at 360,000 people dying from unemployment-related health impacts. So, not being able to perhaps get access to medical assistance, or even mental health issues, suicide, things like this. Whereas in 2018, 80,000 people rather, in the US died from influenza. And there weren't any interventions that shut down the economy at that stage. And so, you've heard people say that the intervention, that, the disease can't be worse than the cure. And it may be that because too quick action was taken, that some of these unintended consequences may be more profound and severe than the actual virus itself. Time will really tell on that. But in terms of responding to your question around climate change, or indeed just even air quality and clean air, because climate change can be such a contentious topic, but I think that having clean air is something that there's fairly universal agreement around, that being something that is a priority and of importance. And if we just look at that, what can we do, to more rapidly and quickly move towards cleaner air outcomes? And I think Germany is, a great example of having done so much in that domain, first on, solar and wind, and more recently on battery storage. And some of the things that were kind of feared, were people were fearful of when Germany embarked on that journey, was around destabilizing the grid. But in actual fact, Germany has the most stable grid, in spite of very high levels of renewable energy penetration. And so, yes, renewables do create a less stable grid, but that doesn't mean that it can't be mitigated and managed. And I think that the first sort of iteration and wave of renewables was focused on government subsidies, because the price of producing these was very high. But now the cost per unit of solar, and more recently battery storage, has come down so dramatically. It's not necessary anymore for there to be huge government subsidies to drive uptake and adoption. And so, to come back to that comment you made at the beginning around incentives, I think that if you create the right market environment, people will be naturally purchasing these things and delivering clean air outcomes and climate change outcomes as a result of that. So it's more about creating the right market conditions to encourage the right purchasing behaviour that will drive the transition from petrol cars to electric cars, and also in our cities, electricity being renewable energy sourced, or more renewable energy autonomy from cities being able to provide their own electricity needs from clean sources.
Which is kind of interesting, because if we think about how the whole electric disruption came along, it was more an entrepreneur who was like pushing towards a more electric state of the world. So you see, there's a lot of space for entrepreneurs to shape the future, and I'm just a little worried. I mean, it's not that we couldn't have prepared for a pandemic, right? There were simulations, there were already warnings many years ago, but policy didn't really react. So the question is, are we able? Yeah, and that is something I guess we won't be able to discuss to the very end. But the question is really, are we ready and take the right strategic steps and measures to prevent a climate collapse or some more irreversible developments? Thomas.
I think you've got the kind of collective answer on that, and then you've got country, the kind of country response. If I look at Australia for a moment, in terms of the electricity market, the Australian Electricity Market Commission last year announced its intention to create a two-sided electricity market, which means that consumers are now market participants and trading, and they're creating the rules to actually allow that to happen en masse. And I don't think the impact of that can really be overstated in terms of what that will mean, because it opens up the market, and it's not just large generators that are going to be just determining the energy mix. And I think that could really rapidly see the next wave of deployment around renewables happen much faster than the first wave. So already we have here 30% of households with rooftop solar, and that's growing at double-digit percentages every year. But with a two-sided market mechanism, you might see another 30% come online, and more than half of those put in batteries. And so then you're in a situation where you actually have a localized energy market, and it's possible for towns and cities to conceivably be quite renewable energy autonomous inside the context of a market, broader market as well. And I think that the forecast that you see around the ability to meet the kind of requirements for decarbonisation, sort of consistent with the Paris Climate Accord, are based on historic rates of uptake and the forecasting of that into the future. But I don't think the ability for new market mechanisms to change the rate of growth around that and actually achieve these targets faster, I think absolutely possible and conceivable. And for the countries that are really aggressively pursuing that agenda, I think that their economies are going to be very well positioned to set up lots of new industries as well and benefit economically from having done that. So if they have a lot of low-cost renewable energy, like in the case of Australia, Professor Ross Garnaut wrote a book recently called Superpower, where he basically said that Australia could reimagine itself as in an industrial sense by like smelting and processing of iron ore and other metals, whereas presently we mine most of them and export them over to other countries like China. And so the energy story, I think, is an economic development story as well. And to come back to the incentive point for the third time, I think that is going to be the compelling reason to move faster and deliver scale outcomes on this topic. So I think if it's just about doing the right thing, you're not going to see the change happen as quickly as we want or need. But if there is an economic imperative there, then a lot of capital could be deployed very quickly.
before we actually go into some questions from the audience, I would like to come back a little to that collaboration topic. Now, you said that it's actually what's currently happening beneficial to the individual and to the climate as a whole, because the individual now starts to actually store, consume energy by himself and looks for solutions and so forth and so on. But what we also currently see is that countries are getting back to their borders again, right? So that global scale of collaboration is actually decreasing currently. Everybody is actually running their own systems largely when it comes to COVID, and so on and so forth. Isn't that, how do you see that? You're already expanding internationally. I think you're active in France, in Austria, and so on and so forth. How do you see that? I mean, you see the impact currently in Australia, and you see the rise for the request for your product. But on a global scale, how can we actually ensure that a market collaborates on a global scale, not only with regards to regulation?
Well, in many respects, I think it's a great levelizer, because no one's expecting you to get on an aeroplane right now and fly and come and meet them in person. It's perfectly valid to be having a teleconference, a video conference, and offering your technology and services. And no one's seeing as you not servicing that market, as well by doing it remotely. The technology can travel very readily, but moving people around the globe, is expensive, and also, has impacts to the environment, to air quality. So I think that although countries are, right now really very focused on their own requirements and needs from a safety perspective, I think it will have them reevaluate how they see themselves in the global context and how they want to do business. But I don't think it will be ultimately, just that everyone's going to stop trading with each other. I think that the way that we trade, the way that we interact with each other will change, and the expectations will I think be far more workable ultimately. And in terms of the context of energy, I think that the notion that we will all just kind of be islanded electrically, suddenly because of COVID, I don't think that's going to happen. There's so much investment that's happened in infrastructure, and there's many economies of scale that are available from grids. But I think that grids can be used far more efficiently through things like different pricing mechanisms, like surge pricing and locational pricing, which means that it might be cheaper to move electricity a small distance, i.e. localized energy, as opposed to moving at long distances, whereas many regulations right now would charge the same amount of money to send electricity a long distance versus a small distance. So I think our understanding of markets will become more sophisticated, in the same way that Uber suddenly thought about surge pricing and peak pricing. I think we'll start to see that not just in the high voltage part of electricity markets, but also down to the granular level with the consumers to encourage the right behaviour. Whereas historically, I think in terms of electricity, we must dumb it down for customers and keep it really simple. But actually, if you can unpack it for them and explain it to them simply, they will understand it. And to the extent there's technology that can automate good behaviour and income, then they'll want to get involved with that. So in terms of the great washout and impact for business more broadly, I mean, it's going to take decades for many sectors to recover, like the hospitality sector and the travel sector and, airlines, all of these things. But I think in other areas, in other sectors, new and innovative businesses will sort of come about as a result of that, in a similar way to what was seen after World War II and even World War I, where many new inventions sort of came about as a result of the constraints that existed in the market.
Okay, so let us turn over to questions from the audience. And as time has already progressed, we want to pick out one. Sebastian, you want to ask that or pass on that question to Jemma?
It's you. So there's one question from the audience stating that it's that the solar system is supposed to be 5 times more efficient now, because of like the drop in air pollution. and he wants to know if that is correct, or is that the right information?
I haven't heard that soundbite or fact before, so I'm not sure that that is correct. We do know that if it's very, very hot, solar panels don't actually produce electricity that efficiently. And so if the climate becomes excessively hot, the output is impacted. And there's no question that cloud cover impacts the output of solar panels. But in terms of air quality and smog and things like that, I mean, there would certainly be an impact, but I don't think we're talking 5 times.
Perhaps to summarize some of the other questions, and then also have a final outlook from you and a final question to you. We briefly touched upon it. You said that it'll take decades for certain branches and certain companies to recover, travel industry and so on and so forth. But you also said it's a chance mode, and it's a chance for example, for new companies, new technologies to emerge. A bit of a look into the crystal ball. What do you think the world will look like after the crisis? Yes, we know we have to live with it for quite a while. And actually then moving backward from that world, how it might look like afterwards, what are the chances today to actually get involved in the green tech and climate tech scene? So you're in there, you're in the middle of it, but there are perhaps a lot of people that want to be involved. So if you portray a world, and what are the trends? And what can we do today to actually be part of that world, to shape it?
Yeah, I mean, they're really great questions. I think that, that this is about, doing business, but, not as usual. And without wanting to borrow cliches, necessity is the mother of invention. But if you look at, World War One, stately homes and, servant bells, which marked the privilege, of the upper classes who lived, above stairs, and some of their servants from below came to an end after World War One, and many women got into paid work and won the vote. And there were no servant bells after World War One, and I think that as that was all swept away, it ushered in benefits for the masses, things like industrial chemistry and mass radio and airline travel, in fact. So I think for companies that are rooted in the future, I think there are already signs of new opportunities that didn't exist just a few weeks ago. So I think that, we're hearing from companies that now can speak on video calls with decision makers in companies that they've been trying to for 40 minutes solid to progress a deal. And if you contrast that with the old way of life of sending emails to more junior people to get to speak to the same decision maker for perhaps 10. And I think there's entrepreneurs in organizations that are asking themselves, what are the arbitrage opportunities in markets as things change fast, or how can I position the sale of this technology to drive efficiencies and capture more revenue for my client in these current market conditions, and winning deals as a result. So I think that I think there'll be new, if you look at it in the context of Power Ledger, there are house building companies that are looking to save money from the bottom line in crisis conditions. And they're now looking at doing deals with solar and battery suppliers with financing arrangements, where the homeowner has the panels, owns the home but not the panels. And then when the homeowner has generated enough electricity for themselves, they'll have it paid off. And so it's really, a simple and clean way for them to get access to this sort of technology. So I think that there are so many opportunities that will emerge as a result of this crisis, and problems that need to be solved. So I think that I'm enormously hopeful that we'll see the best of humankind in terms of solving those things, and actually, ultimately delivering a world that is, better for us all.
Wonderful. Final question. When will we see Power Ledger in Germany?
Well, I would love to have a project in Germany. We are exploring some conversations there, and if you want to put us in touch with people to talk to, we'd be very delighted to. I'm a big fan of Germany. I've only been there a couple of times, but one of the times was for my honeymoon. So I'm very, very excited about coming there for longer term projects for Power Ledger.
So that's a good reason to stay in touch.
We will
Thank
try to
you.
work on that. So thank you very much, Gemma, for participating in our webcast. And I think you really gave us some great insights on what we can do to actually shift our thinking when it comes to climate change. And my very short summary is actually, it depends on really the perspective that you take. Really be an optimistic person, look into the future, and don't just put into the survival mode. There are a lot of chances coming along. It's really about looking at it in the right way. So thanks a lot, and all the best to you, to Australia, and we will try to work on it to bring you here, so that you can actually have some business in Germany. So thank you very much, Sebastian. I think we should also talk
Thank
a
you.
little about the next session. So
Absolutely.
there's going to be a fourth edition. We promised you that it's not a one-time event. Now it's the third edition, and next week is going to be the fourth edition from A Shift in Thinking. And the next one we also think is highly exciting. It's from a community member, a long-lasting community member.
Long-time member.
Samuel, some of you may know him. I think he was member number, I don't know, 5 or 6, so he really moved in here quite early. Let us know what we're going to talk about next week.
So as we promised, we wanted to take up some of the suggestions, and one was HR, tech, and the future of the labor market. And we want to talk a little about the new business models, some new trends and tendencies in this market. With Samuel and with his experience founding a couple of companies in the digital recruiting space, I think we'll have a lot of interesting insights. So looking very much forward to next week.
So without any more things that we have to say, the only thing is perhaps stay healthy and very important, stay happy. So thank you very much for joining.
It's sunny again. Get some fresh air. See you soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.